For decades, it seems like the US has been completely entangled in the Middle East, right? It's this incredibly complex chessboard of alliances, rivalries, and of course, resources. Today, we're going to break down the core strategy, the playbook that has guided American actions in this really critical region for almost a century. So let's dive in. I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It's at the heart of so much of global politics. You see it everywhere: sprawling military bases, tense diplomatic meetings, even war. The U.S. presence is just undeniable. So what's really driving this incredibly deep, long-lasting involvement? Well, the thing is, there's no single, simple answer. The best way to think about it is as a strategic foundation, almost like a three-legged stool built on three core pillars of power. And here's the deal. If you can get your head around these three pillars, you can pretty much understand the whole game. Okay, so here's our roadmap. First, we're going to touch on why the region is so important in the first place. Then, we'll get into each of those three pillars. First, oil and power. Second, the alliance with Israel. And third, the rivalry with Iran. And finally, we'll wrap up by looking at what the future of this whole strategic game might look like. All right, first things first. Why does this specific part of the world matter so much to, well, everyone? Trust me, it's about way more than just what you see in the headlines. For starters, just look at a map. The Middle East is the ultimate crossroads, linking Europe, Asia, and Africa. It controls these massive commercial arteries like the Suez Canal and the Persian Gulf that are vital for global trade. And then, yeah, of course, there's the energy. We're talking about roughly 2/3 of the entire world's proven oil reserves. Way back in 1945, a U.S. State Department report called it a stupendous source of strategic power. And you know what? That's just as true today as it was then. And that brings us perfectly to our first pillar, where oil and raw geopolitical power get fused together. And let's be crystal clear, this isn't just about gas prices. It's about global influence. Just listen to this. This one sentence from President Jimmy Carter back in 1980 is honestly one of the most important statements in modern American foreign policy. It drew a massive line in the sand and officially tied Middle Eastern oil directly to the national security of the United States. And this, of course, became known as the Carter Doctrine. It was a formal public promise, or a threat, depending on your perspective, that the U.S. would use military force to protect its interests in Gulf oil. And believe me, this wasn't just talk. It became the rationale for a huge, permanent American military presence all across the region. Now, here's a super important point. The U.S. is actually the world's biggest oil producer now. So this isn't really about America needing the oil for its own cars. It's about controlling the tap. See, if you control the flow of oil to the rest of the world, you have a massive lever of power you can pull, especially over economic rivals like China, who depend heavily on that energy. And this is what the Carter Doctrine actually looks like on the ground. It looks like huge military bases, tens of thousands of American troops, and entire fleets of warships and jets. The U.S. essentially positioned itself as the self-appointed guardians of the Gulf. And that military presence gets backed up by another incredibly powerful tool: selling weapons. A lot of weapons. Just check out this number. In 2023 alone, the U.S. sold a record-breaking $238 billion worth of arms to its allies in the region. That doesn't just make money, it locks these countries into the American strategic orbit for decades. All right, let's move on to the second pillar of U.S. strategy, which is the incredibly deep, complex, and strategically crucial alliance with the State of Israel. You know, this quote from a former U.S. senator really says it all. From many strategists in Washington, Israel is seen as America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East, not just a friend, but a stable, militarily powerful, democratic partner, a reliable foothold in a very turbulent part of the world. And this partnership is incredibly tight. We're talking about sharing top-secret intelligence on major threats, constantly running joint military drills so their forces can work together seamlessly, and even co-developing some of the world's most advanced military technology. And a huge part of what drives all this, a really huge part, is that both countries see eye to eye on regional threats, especially Iran. And as you'd expect, this alliance is backed by a whole lot of money. In 2016, the U.S. signed a 10-year agreement promising $38 billion in military aid to Israel. At the time, that was the single largest security aid package in all of U.S. history. And that shared threat we just talked about, well, it leads us straight into our third and final pillar, the one that has really defined so many of the region's conflicts for the last 40-plus years: the intense, ongoing rivalry with Iran. You see, everything changed in 1979. The Iranian Revolution toppled the Shah, who was a really close U.S. ally. He was replaced by a fiercely anti-American government. Almost overnight, a partner became a major adversary. And ever since then, U.S. policy has been this wild mix of trying to contain Iran, like backing Iraq in its war against them, and sometimes even weird, contradictory secret deals. And it's all led to the tense standoff we see today over everything from nuclear weapons to proxy wars across the region. So what this rivalry has done is effectively split the Middle East into two camps. On one side, you have the United States and its traditional allies, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others. And on the other side, Iran has built its own network of influence, mostly through allied groups in places like Lebanon, Iraq, and Yemen. And this right here is the absolute key. Containing Iran became the central organizing principle for pretty much all U.S. strategy in the Middle East. Almost every major decision, from where to send troops to big diplomatic pushes like the Abraham Accords, can be seen through this lens, building a stronger front to push back against Tehran. So, there we have it, the three pillars: control the oil, back Israel, and contain Iran. Simple enough, right? Well, no. Here's the problem, the thing that gives U.S. policymakers headaches. These three pillars don't always fit together nicely. In fact, a lot of the time, they pull U.S. policy in totally opposite directions. Just think about this juggling act. The U.S. has to support Israel's security, no questions asked. At the same time, it has to keep its powerful Arab allies, like Saudi Arabia, happy. They're essential for keeping the oil flowing. And then it tries to use both of those relationships to build a coalition against their common enemy, Iran. It's like playing three-dimensional chess, where a move that strengthens one pillar could completely destabilize another. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act. So that's the three-pillar strategy in a nutshell: oil, Israel, and Iran. It's a framework that was built for a very different world, one defined by total oil dependency and Cold War rivalries. But today, with new global powers like China making their own moves, and the world slowly shifting away from fossil fuels, you have to ask, how long can this 80-year-old game plan actually last? And, more importantly, what comes next?